The scent of rosemary and thyme drifted through the stone corridors of the castle, like a ghost from another life, carried on drafts that whispered through cracks in the ancient stonework. Fenler Ashcrest stood at the arched window of his chamber, his towering frame silhouetted against the dying light of evening. Watching shadows stretch across the kingdom, he no longer had the strength to rule. His long black hair fell past his shoulders, unkempt and wild, tangled by wind and neglect. His beard had grown thick and untamed, obscuring the strong jaw that had once been clean-shaven and proud. The once mighty Alpha King, whose presence alone could command armies and inspire loyalty in the hearts of even the most hardened warriors, now appeared as nothing more than a hollow monument to grief, a statue carved from sorrow and regret. The chamber around him reflected his internal state. Dust gathered in corners that servants were forbidden to clean. The great four-poster bed remained perpetually unmade, its silk sheets tangled and cold. Tapestries depicting glorious battles and peaceful harvests hung crooked on the walls, their colors fading in the relentless march of time. The fire in the hearth had died hours ago, leaving only gray ash and the ghost of warmth. 3 years had passed since Annalith died in his arms, her skin burning with fever that no healer could break. Her final breath a whisper of his name that haunted his dreams every night without exception. 3 years since the mysterious epidemic had swept through the kingdom like a plague of sorrow, taking with it the only woman whose love had made him feel truly human, truly whole. And in those 3 years, Fenler had refused to let anyone prepare food for him, could not bear the thought of comfort, of pleasure, of anything that reminded him he was still alive while she, his brilliant and beautiful Annalith, was reduced to bones and memory beneath cold marble. The transformation had been gradual at first. In the immediate aftermath of her death, he had functioned on instinct alone, performing his duties with mechanical precision. He had presided over her funeral with a face carved from stone, accepting condolences from nobles and commoners alike without truly hearing their words. He had continued to rule, to sign documents, to render judgments. But with each passing week, the veneer of normalcy had cracked further. First, he stopped attending state dinners, claiming illness or pressing matters that required his attention. Then he began taking his meals alone, dismissing the castle cooks, and insisting on simple provisions he could prepare himself. When concerned advisors questioned his behavior, he responded with such cold fury that they learned to hold their tongues. Soon, even those simple self-prepared meals grew smaller, less frequent. Water became his primary sustenance, occasionally supplemented by bitter herbs he gathered in moonlit walks through gardens that Annalith had once tended with such care. The servants whispered in hushed tones about the king, who was slowly starving himself to death. They left trays of carefully prepared meals outside his door, only to find them untouched the next morning. The kingdom's finest chefs had attempted to tempt him with delicacies from across the realm, but Fenlor turned them all away. He survived on water drawn from the well himself, wild herbs he gathered in the castle gardens under moonlight, and occasional strips of meat he hunted and cooked over a small fire in the solitude of the forest. His advisors pleaded, his warriors worried, his people prayed. But Fenler Ashcrest, the broken Alpha King, had lost the will to eat, to live, to feel anything beyond the crushing weight of guilt and loneliness. The kingdom, though still protected by loyal guards and maintained by dutiful ministers, began to sense the absence of true leadership. Markets still bustled, children still played in the streets, but there was a heaviness in the air, as if the very land mourned alongside its king. On this particular morning, something unfamiliar stirred within Fenler's chest. Perhaps it was the way the autumn wind carried the scent of distant rain. Or perhaps it was simply the suffocating silence of the castle walls pressing in on him once more. Whatever the reason, he found himself reaching for a worn cloak and slipping out of the castle through a forgotten servant's entrance, desperate to escape the memories that haunted every corner of his home. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube. Extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. Disguised as a common traveler, Fenlor walked through the cobblestone streets of the capital, observing his people from beneath the shadow of his hood. The morning market was alive with activity, a riot of color and sound that assaulted senses grown accustomed to the silent gray of castle stones. Merchants called out their wares in voices hoarse from hours of shouting, competing to be heard over the general din. Children darted between stalls like quicksilver, laughing and playing games that Fenlor had forgotten existed. The aroma of fresh bread mingled with the earthy scent of vegetables and herbs, with livestock and leather, with spices from distant lands and the metallic tang of the blacksmith's forge nearby. It was a world that felt impossibly distant from his own existence, a reminder that life continued its relentless march forward even when his own had stopped, frozen in the moment of Annalith's last breath. He watched a young couple haggling playfully over the price of apples, their hands clasped together, their eyes bright with shared joy. He saw an old woman selecting vegetables with the practiced eye of someone who had cooked for a large family for decades. He observed fathers hoisting children onto their shoulders for better views, mothers negotiating prices with a fierceness born of tight budgets and hungry mouths to feed. The normalcy of it all felt like a rebuke. These people carried on despite hardship, found joy despite uncertainty, built lives despite the inevitable presence of death and loss. Why could he not do the same? But the question only deepened his sense of isolation. They had not lost what he had lost. They did not carry the guilt that weighed on his shoulders like a physical burden. He was about to turn back when a scent arrested him completely. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable among the chaos of the market, but as it grew stronger, Fenlor felt his feet moving of their own accord, drawn by something he could not name. The aroma was warm, comforting, layered with herbs and spices that spoke of home and memory. For the first time in 3 years, his stomach clenched with something other than emptiness. The scent led him to a small makeshift stall tucked between a fabric merchant and a flower seller. Behind a weathered wooden table stood a young woman with skin as pale as moonlight and hair the color of fresh snow, braided simply and falling over one shoulder. She wore a red dress that had seen better days, patched in places but clean and well-maintained. Her hands moved with practiced grace as she ladled steaming portions of food into simple clay bowls for the handful of customers gathered around her stall. Helena Nightwill did not notice the tall, cloaked stranger watching her from the edge of the crowd. She was focused on her work, smiling warmly at an elderly woman as she handed over a bowl of stew, refusing the extra coin the woman tried to press into her palm. Fenlor found himself stepping closer, his eyes fixed on the large pot from which that impossible aroma emanated. He could see chunks of tender meat, root vegetables, and dark green herbs swirling in a rich golden broth. Steam rose from the pot like offering smoke, and something deep within him, something he had thought died with Annalith, stirred to life. Helena looked up and met his gaze. Her eyes were a soft gray, kind and unafraid, and when she smiled at him, it was without pretense or recognition. To her, he was simply another hungry soul in need of a meal. "Come," she said, her voice gentle but insistent. "You look like you have not eaten in days. Sit, please." Fenlor wanted to refuse, as he had refused countless times before. The words of polite dismissal were already forming on his lips, but something in her expression, in the genuine concern that softened her features, made him hesitate. She reminded him of something he had lost, not just Annalith, but a simpler kindness, a warmth that existed before duty and crown and crushing responsibility. "I do not have much coin," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. Helena waved a hand dismissively. "I did not ask about your coin. I asked you to sit. When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" The question struck him harder than any blade. When had he last eaten a proper meal? The truth was he could barely remember. Fenler lowered himself onto the rough wooden bench, feeling strangely out of place in his own kingdom. Helena ladled a generous portion into a bowl and set it before him, along with a piece of dark bread still warm from baking. The steam rose between them, carrying with it that haunting, familiar scent. Fenler stared at the bowl, his hands clenched on the edge of the table. "I cannot," he whispered. "Cannot or will not?" Helena asked, her tone neither judgmental nor pushy, simply curious. Both. Neither. He shook his head, unable to articulate the wall that stood between him and the simple act of accepting food from another person. Helena pulled up a stool across from him and rested her chin on her hand, studying him with those calm gray eyes. "You carry grief," she said softly. "I can see it in the way you hold yourself, as if the weight of the world rests on your shoulders alone. Whoever you lost, they would not want you to waste away like this." Fenler's jaw tightened. "You know nothing about what she would want." "Perhaps not," Helena agreed. "But I know something about loss. I lost my mother when I was young. She was the one who taught me to cook, who showed me that food is more than sustenance. It is memory, tradition, love, made tangible. When she died, I thought I would never feel whole again. But then I realized that every time I make her recipes, she is with me. The act of cooking, of feeding others, keeps her alive in a way that grief alone never could." She reached across the table and gently pushed the bowl closer to him. "Just one bite," she said. "Not for me. Not even for yourself. For whoever it is you are mourning. Let them nourish you one more time." Fenler did not know why her words affected him so deeply. Perhaps it was the sincerity in her voice, or the way she spoke of the dead without pity or platitudes. Perhaps it was simply that he was so desperately tired of the emptiness. Whatever the reason, he found himself reaching for the wooden spoon with a hand that trembled slightly. He brought the spoon to his lips and tasted the stew. The world stopped. Time itself seemed to suspend, holding its breath as flavor flooded his mouth, his senses, his very soul. The exact combination of herbs, perfectly balanced between savory and sweet, the way the meat had been seasoned not just on the surface, but allowed to absorb flavor deep into its fibers. The subtle sweetness of root vegetables cooked to perfect tenderness that dissolved on the tongue, even the richness of the broth itself, layered with depth that spoke of hours of patient simmering and careful attention. This was not simply a good stew, not merely well-prepared food. This was the stew. The impossible stew. The one his mother had made when he was a child, sitting in the great kitchen of the castle on cold winter mornings, her hands moving with the same patient grace as she taught him the names of herbs and the importance of timing. The one she had taught Annalith in secret after their bonding ceremony, passing down a recipe that was supposed to exist nowhere outside the royal family, a tradition guarded for generations as carefully as any state secret. The flavors unlocked memories he had buried deep. He was 7 years old again, watching his mother stir the great pot, inhaling the steam and promising that one day, when he had children of his own, she would teach his mate to make it so that the tradition would continue. He was 23, watching Annalith in the castle kitchens late at night, learning the recipe from his mother with fierce concentration, determined to master every detail, her tongue caught between her teeth in that expression of focus he had loved so dearly. He was 30, eating this exact stew on a winter morning while Annalith laughed at some joke he could no longer remember, her eyes bright with life, her future still stretching endlessly before her. The memories crashed over him like waves, each one bringing pain and sweetness in equal measure. His eyes burned with tears he had not shed in years, his throat tight with emotion he could barely contain. Fenler's spoon clattered against the bowl. He stared at Helena with wide eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. "Where did you learn this recipe?" Helena blinked, surprised by the intensity of his reaction. "From my mother," as I said. "It is an old recipe, passed down through her family. She told me it had to be made with patience and love, that the ingredients were less important than the intention behind the cooking. Why do you ask?" "This recipe," Fenler said, his voice barely above a whisper, "should not exist outside of one place. It is a dish of the royal family, guarded for generations." Helena's eyes widened. "The royal family? That cannot be. My mother was a simple woman, a cook in a merchant's household. She never had connections to nobility." "Then how?" Fenler demanded, though his tone held no anger, only desperate confusion, and something that felt dangerously like hope. "I do not know," Helena admitted. "But if it brings you comfort, if it helps you eat again, does the mystery of it matter so much?" Fenler looked down at the bowl, at the steam still rising from its surface. For the first time in 3 years, he felt hunger. Not the dull ache of an empty stomach, but true hunger. A desire to taste, to savor, to live just a little bit longer. He picked up the spoon again and took another bite, then another. The warmth spread through his chest, thawing something that had been frozen since Annalith's death. He ate the entire bowl in silence, while Helena watched with quiet satisfaction. When he finally set down the spoon, he felt exhausted and strangely lighter at the same time, as if he had been carrying a burden he had not realized could be set down. "What is your name?" he asked. "Helena. Helena Nightwill." "Helena," he repeated, tasting the name. "Thank you." She smiled. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Fenler hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I will." And so began a ritual that would change both of their lives forever. Each morning, Fenler would slip out of the castle in his worn cloak and make his way to Helena's stall, timing his arrival to coincide with the lull between the early market rush and the midday crowds. She would greet him with that same warm smile, always having set aside a portion of whatever she had prepared that day, sometimes keeping it warm over a small brazier she had positioned behind her table. Sometimes it was the stew that had first drawn him in, prepared with slight variations depending on what ingredients she could afford or what the season provided. Other times it was roasted vegetables with herbs that filled the air with an aroma that made his mouth water, despite years of conditioning himself not to want food. Or a simple soup, made from whatever ingredients she could afford, transformed by her skill and care into something approaching magic. They spoke little at first, their silences comfortable rather than awkward. Fenler was not accustomed to casual conversation. His every word in the castle weighted with political implication and courtly maneuvering. But Helena seemed to understand his need for quiet companionship, for presence without demand. She would work while he ate, chopping vegetables for the next batch, kneading dough for bread, her movements fluid and practiced. Sometimes she hummed old songs under her breath, melodies Fenler vaguely recognized from his childhood, folk tunes that had been sung in the kingdom for generations. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, words began to flow more easily between them, like a stream slowly clearing of debris until the water ran pure and swift. Helena told him about her life on the streets, painting pictures with her words of a world he had never truly understood, despite ruling over it. She spoke of the kindness of strangers who had helped her survive, small acts of generosity that had meant the difference between life and death, the baker who had given her day-old bread without asking for payment, the elderly widow who had let her sleep in a doorway when winter nights grew too cold to survive in the open, the fruit seller who had taught her which produce was still good despite appearances, how to judge quality by touch and scent rather than just sight. She told him about the small joys she found in feeding others, the satisfaction of watching a tired laborer's face relax after the first bite of warm food, the way children's eyes lit up when she gave them extra portions. She spoke of her mother with love and sorrow, of the recipes she guarded like treasures, each one a tangible link to a woman who had shown her that skill and care could create value even in poverty. She shared her dream of one day having a small tavern of her own, where people could come not just for food, but for comfort and community, a place where the lonely could find companionship, and the hungry could find nourishment for body and soul alike. Fenlor, still carefully guarding his identity, spoke in vaguer terms, but found himself being more honest with this white-haired street vendor than he had been with anyone in years. He told her of loss, of the crushing weight of responsibility that felt too heavy to bear alone, of a life that had lost its meaning when the person who made it worthwhile was torn away. He did not tell her he was the king, but he spoke truthfully about his grief, finding in Helena a listener who neither judged nor offered empty reassurances, who did not try to fix him, but simply bore witness to his pain. "You speak like someone who has forgotten how to live for himself," Helena observed one morning as she kneaded dough for bread. "As if you believe your own happiness would be a betrayal of some kind." "Is it not?" Fenlor asked quietly. "No," Helena said firmly. "To honor the dead does not mean joining them in darkness. It means carrying their light forward, letting their love change you without destroying you." Her words echoed in his mind long after he returned to the castle each day. Slowly, gradually, Fenlor began to eat the meals prepared by the castle cooks again, though he found them lacking compared to Helena's simple fare. His advisors noticed the change, the way color returned to his face, the way he began to sit straighter in his throne. They whispered among themselves, wondering what miracle had occurred. But Fenlor kept his morning excursions secret. He told himself it was because he did not want to disturb the fragile peace he had found. In truth, he was afraid that revealing his identity would shatter the easy companionship that had developed between them. In Helena's presence, he was not the Alpha King, not the ruler of a vast kingdom, not the man who had failed to save his mate. He was simply Fenlor, a man learning to live again. But secrets, like all things, have a way of revealing themselves. It happened on a crisp autumn morning when the market was more crowded than usual, swollen by farmers from outlying villages bringing in the last harvest before winter set in. The air smelled of apples and wood smoke, of earth preparing for its long sleep. Fenlor had just settled onto his usual bench, accepting a bowl of Helena's vegetable soup, the steam rising between them in the cool morning air, when a commotion erupted near the edge of the square. Shouts rang out, harsh and aggressive, cutting through the normal market chatter like blades. The sound of steel being drawn from scabbards followed, that distinctive ringing that every warrior knows, that makes instincts honed over years of training surge to the forefront. The crowd near the disturbance scattered, parents grabbing children, merchants hastily covering valuable goods, everyone seeking safety. Fenlor was on his feet instantly, his warrior instincts overriding everything else, the soup forgotten. Helena called out behind him, but he was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward the disturbance with a speed and purpose that drew attention. He found a group of bandits harassing a merchant, 4 of them surrounding the terrified man, their weapons drawn, their intentions clear in the predatory grins on their faces. The merchant, a portly man who sold fine cloth, had clearly caught their attention with his rich garments and heavy purse. His hands shook as he fumbled to surrender his goods, tears streaming down his face. The city guards had not yet arrived, delayed by the crowded market square, and the bandits grew bolder with each passing moment, one of them reaching for the merchant's daughter, a girl no more than 15, who stood frozen with terror. Without thinking, without considering consequences or his disguise or anything beyond the immediate need to protect, Fenlor threw back his hood and stepped into the confrontation. His hand went to where his sword would normally hang, finding only empty air since he had come unarmed to avoid suspicion. But he did not need a weapon. His voice, when he spoke, carried the unmistakable authority of command. the tone of someone who had led armies and brought warriors to heel with nothing more than force of will. Enough. The bandits turned, ready to mock the stranger who dared interfere, ready to add him to their list of victims. But the words died on their lips when they saw who stood before them. Even in worn traveling clothes, even with his hair unkempt and his beard wild, Fenler Ashcrest was unmistakable to anyone who had ever laid eyes on their king. His height alone set him apart, towering over most men. His bearing, the way he held himself with unconscious authority despite the common cloak. The fierce intelligence in his dark eyes that had assessed battlefields and made strategic decisions that saved thousands of lives. The aura of raw power that radiated from him like heat from a forge, barely contained even in this moment of relative calm. The bandits' weapons clattered to the cobblestones as they dropped to their knees, their faces draining of color, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist under sun. "My king," one stammered, his voice high with terror. "We did not know. We meant no disrespect. We would never. Forgive us, your majesty, please." Fenler barely heard them. He was acutely aware of the crowd's reaction rippling outward from where he stood, spreading through the market like a wave. People dropped into bows and curtsies, some graceful from practice, others awkward with shock. Shocked whispers spread through the market like wildfire, voices overlapping in a rising tide of astonishment. "The king. That is the king. Our king walks among us. When did he arrive? How long has he been here? Why is he in such humble clothes?" But his attention was fixed on one person, and one person alone. Helena stood frozen behind her stall, her eyes wide with disbelief, her face pale as her white hair, making her gray eyes seem enormous in her delicate face. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged. The bowl she had been holding, the one she had filled for him with such care, slipped from her fingers and shattered on the cobblestones, the soup spreading across the stones like spilled blood, steam rising from the broken pieces. The sound of the breaking bowl seemed to break the spell. Helena took a step back, then another, her hand rising to her mouth as the full weight of realization crashed over her. Fenler could see the thoughts racing behind her eyes, the memories of every casual conversation, every informal moment, every time she had treated him as an equal rather than royalty, every time she had given him advice, or challenged his perspective or spoken to him without the careful deference that usually accompanied every word spoken to a king. By the time the city guards arrived to take the bandits away, a circle of space had formed around Fenlor. People kept their distance, offering reverent bows but too afraid to approach. All except Helena, who remained rooted in place, her face pale as her hair. Fenler crossed the distance between them slowly, aware that everything had changed in the span of a heartbeat. When he stood before her stall, Helena finally found her voice. "You are the king," she whispered. "I am. All this time. Every morning. You let me speak to you as if we were equals," Fenler finished gently, "because in your presence, I felt like one. Helena, I never meant to deceive you." She shook her head, taking a step back. "I fed the king like he was a common beggar. I spoke without deference. I presumed to give you advice about grief and life." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "I could be punished for such familiarity." "The thought of you being punished is absurd," Fenler said, his voice hardening. "You saved my life, Helena. You gave me a reason to eat again, to live again, when I had given up on both. If anything, I am in your debt." The crowd had grown silent, everyone straining to hear the exchange between their king and the mysterious white-haired girl who had somehow earned his favor. Fenler straightened to his full height, addressing not just Helena, but everyone gathered. "This woman, Helena Nightwill, has provided a service to her king and kingdom that none of you could. She will come to the castle as my personal cook. Any who speak against her or treat her with anything less than respect will answer to me directly." A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Helena opened her mouth to protest, but Fenler raised a hand. "Please," he said, his voice softer, meant only for her. "Let me repay this kindness. Come to the castle, not as a servant, but as someone whose skill and company I value greatly. You will have your own quarters, fair wages, and the freedom to refuse any task you find unsuitable. I ask only that you continue to cook for me as you have been doing." Helena searched his face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I accept, Your Majesty." "Fenlor," he corrected quietly. "When we are alone, please call me Fenlor. I have heard my name spoken without fear in your voice for weeks now. I would not lose that." A small smile touched Helena's lips despite her obvious uncertainty. "Very well, Fenler." The transition to castle life was not as difficult as Helena had feared, though it carried challenges she had not anticipated. Fenler kept his word with a meticulousness that spoke of deep honor. She was given a spacious room in the western wing of the castle, a chamber larger than any space she had ever inhabited, with a window overlooking the gardens that Annalith had once tended. The room had a proper bed with a feather mattress, soft beyond anything Helena had known, and linens of such fine quality she was initially afraid to touch them. There was a writing desk, though she barely knew her letters, a wardrobe filled with dresses in various colors, all finer than her beloved red one, a small sitting area with cushioned chairs positioned near the fireplace. It was far nicer than any place she had ever lived, almost overwhelming in its luxury. The first night, she had lain awake for hours, unable to sleep on the soft mattress, feeling like an imposter in these fine surroundings. Eventually, she had moved to the floor beside the bed, wrapped in a simple blanket, and slept more soundly there than she would have on the luxurious mattress. The kitchens were vast and well-stocked, a cook's dream. Where she had worked with one small pot and whatever ingredients she could afford, here there were multiple hearths, ovens built into the stone walls, and storage rooms filled with provisions from across the kingdom. Spices she had only heard of in stories sat in neat jars, labeled in precise script. Fresh meat and fish arrived daily. Vegetables came from the castle gardens, perfect and unblemished. It was abundance beyond anything she had imagined, and at first it paralyzed her. The other cooks were initially suspicious of the street vendor who had somehow earned the king's favor, their whispers following her through the kitchen like shadows. Who did she think she was? What made her so special? Was she sleeping with the king? The questions were never asked directly, but Helena heard them nonetheless, felt them in sideways glances, and the way conversation stopped when she entered a room. But they quickly warmed to her when they saw her skill and humble nature, when they realized she asked rather than commanded, learned rather than assumed, and gave credit generously to those who helped her. She praised the bread baker for his technique, learned from the pastry chef how to make delicate confections, and showed the apprentice cooks shortcuts her mother had taught her. Within weeks, she had become not a disruption to the kitchen hierarchy, but an integral part of it, someone they came to for advice and whose company they actively sought. Helena prepared meals for Fenler 3 times a day, served in his private chambers rather than the great hall. At first, she maintained rigid formality, addressing him as Your Majesty and keeping her eyes lowered. But Fenlor gently coaxed her back into easier conversation, asking about her day, about new recipes she wanted to try, about anything that would bring back the natural warmth of their market encounters. Slowly, the castle began to transform. Fenlor started taking meals in the great hall again, presiding over dinners with his advisors and nobles. He resumed regular audiences with his people, hearing their concerns and rendering judgments with a clarity of mind he had not possessed in years. The court, which had grown stagnant in his absence, came back to life. But it was in the quiet moments, in the early mornings or late evenings when Helena brought him food and sat to share a cup of tea, that Fenlor felt most alive. She had a way of seeing through the layers of authority and responsibility to the man beneath, of treating him not as a king, but as a person who still carried wounds that needed tending. "Tell me about her," Helena said one evening as they sat by the fire in his chambers. "About Annalith." Fenler had been avoiding this conversation, afraid that speaking of his late mate would drive a wedge between them. But Helena's expression held only gentle curiosity, no jealousy or judgment. "She was fierce," Fenler said slowly, "a warrior in her own right, though she preferred diplomacy to combat. She could bring warring factions to agreement with nothing more than patient words and unwavering conviction." He stared into the flames. "When the epidemic came, she refused to hide safely in the castle while our people suffered. She went among them, tending to the sick, offering comfort to the dying, and in doing so, she contracted the illness herself." "You blame yourself," Helena observed. "I was the Alpha King. It was my duty to protect her, and I failed." "You were her mate," Helena said gently, "not her jailer. From what you describe, she made her own choice. She died doing what she believed was right. That is not a failure on your part. That is her strength." The words settled over Fenlor like a balm. He had heard countless people try to absolve him of guilt over the years, but Helena's simple acknowledgement of Annalith's agency felt different, truer somehow. "You would have liked her," Fenler said. Helena smiled softly. "I think I already do, in a way. She lives in your memories, in the way you speak of her. That is a kind of immortality." As months passed, the castle became something it had not been in years. A home. Helena's presence brought life to the cold stone corridors. She befriended the servants, trading recipes and stories. She started a small garden of her own, where she grew herbs and vegetables, teaching the younger kitchen staff the techniques her mother had taught her. And Fenler watched her with growing fascination. He admired the way she moved through the world with quiet confidence, unimpressed by titles or wealth, treating the lowest scullery maid with the same respect she showed to nobles. He loved the way she hummed while cooking, old songs she had learned from her mother. He treasured the moments when she laughed, a sound as bright and unexpected as sunshine breaking through storm clouds. It took him longer than it should have to recognize what was happening. He told himself he simply appreciated her company, valued her skill, enjoyed her friendship. But the truth became undeniable one winter evening, when he found himself standing outside her quarters, holding a book of poetry he had wanted to share with her, his heart racing like a nervous boy's. He was falling in love with Helena Nightwill. The realization terrified him. He had never expected to feel this way again, had convinced himself that the bond he shared with Annalith was a once-in-a-lifetime gift that could never be replicated. But what he felt for Helena was different from what he had felt for Annalith. Not lesser, but unique, shaped by different circumstances and different needs. Annalith had been his equal in power, a leader who stood beside him in ruling the kingdom. Helena was gentler, quieter, but no less strong. She did not seek to rule or command. Her strength lay in compassion, in the ability to see people's pain and offer comfort without expecting anything in return. Fenler began to imagine a future where Helena stood beside him, not just as cook or friend, but as his queen. He pictured her in royal garments, her white hair crowned with silver, her smile bringing warmth to state dinners and diplomatic functions. He imagined waking each morning to her presence, ending each day in her company, building a life together that honored the past while embracing the future. But he also noticed something that made his hope falter. Helena spoke often of a man named Emmanuel Lastmer. The name came up casually at first, mentioned in passing stories about her life before the castle. Emmanuel had helped her repair her stall after a storm. Emmanuel had shared his bread with her when her own supplies ran short. Emmanuel had sat with her through cold nights when she was afraid and alone. At first, Fenler thought nothing of it. But as the mentions accumulated, he began to notice the way Helena's voice softened when she spoke the name, the way a small smile would touch her lips at certain memories. One evening, he finally asked, "This Emmanuel, he means a great deal to you?" Helena looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, surprise flickering across her features. "Yes," she said simply. "He is a good man, a carpenter and woodworker. We have known each other for years." Fenler felt something cold settle in his chest. "Are you—" He hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question. "Are your affections engaged?" Helena set down her knife, her expression becoming thoughtful. "Emmanuel and I have an understanding," she said carefully. "We are not formally betrothed, but there is an affection between us. He has been patient, waiting for me to establish stability before we speak of marriage." She met Fenler's gaze. "Why do you ask?" Fenler realized he had overstepped, revealing more of his own feelings than was wise. "Simple curiosity," he said, though the lie tasted bitter. "You speak of him fondly. I wanted to ensure you were content." Helena studied him for a moment longer, and Fenler wondered if she could see through his carefully constructed walls. But she simply nodded and returned to her work. "I am content," she said softly. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a door closing. Fenler tried to bury his feelings, to accept Helena's friendship and companionship as the gift it was without wanting more. But love, once acknowledged, is not easily dismissed. He found himself watching her more closely, noticing small things, the way afternoon light caught in her white hair, the graceful movements of her hands as she worked, the soft humming that filled whatever room she occupied. His advisors began to notice the change in him as well. They whispered among themselves that the king seemed distracted, that he smiled more, but also seemed troubled by private thoughts. Some suggested it was time for him to consider remarriage, to secure the succession and provide the kingdom with a queen. Others worried that any attempt to move on from Annalith would backfire, plunging Fenlor back into darkness. None of them suspected the truth, that their king had fallen hopelessly in love with a white-haired cook who had saved his life with a simple bowl of stew. Winter deepened, and with it came the anniversary of Annalith's death. Fenler dreaded the day, knowing it would bring back the full weight of his grief. He considered canceling his daily meals with Helena, afraid that his dark mood would drive her away or worse, make her feel responsible for his pain. But when the morning came, Helena arrived at his chambers as usual, carrying not breakfast, but something else entirely. She set a small bundle on the table, wrapped in cloth. "I thought you might want to be alone today," she said gently. "But I also thought you should not be entirely alone. Inside are some sweet rolls and dried fruit, provisions for a journey if you wish to take one. Sometimes grief is best processed in movement." Fenlor unwrapped the bundle, touched by her thoughtfulness. "You are very perceptive." "My mother died in winter," Helena said. "Every year on the anniversary, I visit her grave and spend the day there, talking to her, remembering. It helps." She paused. "I do not know where your wife rests, but perhaps visiting her might bring you peace." "The royal mausoleum," Fenlor said. "I have not been there since the funeral. I was afraid of what I might feel." "Fear is understandable," Helena said, "but avoidance only lets fear grow stronger." Her words struck him deeply. He realized that he had been avoiding not just the mausoleum, but all the places and things that reminded him of Annalith. In trying to escape the pain, he had locked away the good memories as well, leaving himself with only a hollow grief. "Will you come with me?" The words left his mouth before he could consider them. He saw Helena's surprise and quickly added, "You need not. I only thought—" Her presence would help me face the memories without drowning in them. Helena hesitated, then nodded. "If you believe it would help, then yes." They walked through the castle in silence, Fenlor leading the way through corridors he had avoided for years, each step feeling heavier than the last. Helena followed a respectful distance behind, her presence a quiet comfort that gave him the courage to continue. They passed through the castle grounds, through gardens where dead leaves swirled in cold wind, past the training yards where young warriors practiced their forms, and finally to the ancient mausoleum built into the mountainside behind the castle. The stone structure was beautiful in its austerity, a testament to craftsmanship and reverence that had stood for centuries. Carved pillars supported an arched entrance, weathered by time but still magnificent. Climbing vines had covered much of the exterior, green and vibrant in summer, but now dormant for winter, their bare stems creating intricate patterns against the pale stone. The massive bronze doors stood partially open, as they always did for royal family, an invitation to remember, to honor, to grieve. Inside, the air was cool and still, thick with the weight of history and loss. Pale sunlight filtered through high windows designed to let in light without exposing the interior to weather, creating columns of illumination that fell across marble effigies and stone sarcophagi like benedictions. The ancestors of Fenlor's line rested here, generations of rulers and warriors and leaders, each one commemorated in stone and inscription, their deeds recorded for posterity. But Fenlor had eyes only for one tomb. Annalith's resting place was at the center of the chamber, positioned on a raised dais that elevated it above the older tombs, marking it as belonging to a queen. It was carved from white marble so pure it seemed to glow in the dim light, veined with gold that caught and reflected whatever illumination touched it. Her name was inscribed in elegant script that flowed like water across the stone. Annalith Moonwhisper Ashcrest, Queen, Beloved, Gone Too Soon. Her titles followed, a litany of achievements and honors that felt hollow against the reality of her absence. Carved reliefs adorned the sides of the tomb, depicting scenes from her life, her coronation, her work among the people, her presence at Fenlor's side during times of war and peace. Fenlor approached slowly, each step requiring conscious effort, as if moving through water. His heart pounded in his chest, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel Helena's presence behind him, far enough back to give him privacy, but close enough that he knew he was not alone. That knowledge made all the difference. He knelt beside the tomb, his knees hitting the cold marble floor with a sound that echoed through the chamber. His hand reached out, trembling, and placed itself on the cold stone. He closed his eyes, trying to feel some connection to the woman who lay beneath, trying to sense her presence, her approval, anything that would tell him he was not betraying her memory by continuing to live. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "I am sorry I could not save you. Sorry I have been lost for so long, wandering in darkness because the world seemed too bright without you in it. Sorry I did not honor your memory by continuing to live the way you would have wanted, with purpose and compassion and hope for the future." The tomb offered no answer, but Fenlor felt the words pouring out of him now, unstoppable. Years of suppressed grief, finally breaking through the dam he had constructed around his heart. "You were everything to me, Annalith. My partner, my equal, my conscience when I faltered. You made me a better king, a better man. When you died, I thought the best part of me died with you. I stopped eating because food tasted like ash without you to share it with. I stopped taking joy in ruling because every decision I made, I wanted to discuss with you first. I stopped living because a world without you in it felt like a cruel mockery of what had been." He pressed his forehead against the stone, tears streaming down his face freely now, the first tears he had allowed since the funeral. But then someone came into my life. Someone unexpected. Someone I never sought. Helena Nightwill, a street vendor with white hair and gray eyes and hands that can transform simple ingredients into comfort. She fed me. Annalith. Not just my body, but my soul. She reminded me what it feels like to want to wake up each morning, to look forward to conversation, to feel hunger not just as emptiness but as anticipation of satisfaction. And then, in a moment of raw honesty, that felt both terrifying and liberating. He admitted what he had been afraid to acknowledge even to himself. "I think I am falling in love again," he said to the marble tomb. "I did not think it possible. I did not think I had the right. You were supposed to be my only mate, the one person destiny created for me. But she makes me want to live, Annalith. She makes me believe there could be a future worth fighting for, worth building toward." He pressed his forehead harder against the stone, his voice breaking. "I need to know that you would understand, that you would not see it as a betrayal of what we had, that you would want me to be happy, even if that happiness comes from someone who is not you." The tomb offered no answer, but Fenlor felt something shift within himself nonetheless. The guilt that had weighed on him for so long seemed to lighten, not disappearing, but becoming bearable. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that loving again did not erase what he had shared with Annalith. The heart had room for multiple loves, each unique and precious in its own way. When he finally stood and turned, he found Helena wiping tears from her own eyes. She offered him a small, understanding smile. "She would have wanted you to be happy," Helena said softly. "Anyone who loved you as much as she clearly did would want that." They walked back to the castle together, and Fenlor felt lighter than he had in years. He had faced his grief, spoken his truth, and found that the world had not ended. If anything, it felt as though it was beginning again. But with this new clarity came a difficult decision. He needed to tell Helena how he felt. Keeping his feelings hidden felt like a dishonesty, a betrayal of the honest friendship they had built. Yet he also feared her answer, feared that declaring his love would drive her away and cost him even her friendship. He decided to wait until after the winter solstice celebrations, giving himself time to find the right words. The solstice feast was a grand affair, the first major celebration Fenlor had allowed since Annalith's death. The great hall was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, and nobles from across the kingdom gathered to celebrate the turning of the year. Helena had worked with the kitchen staff to prepare a magnificent feast, though she herself remained out of sight, preferring to work behind the scenes. Fenlor sat at the high table, presiding over the festivities with a grace that surprised many who had grown accustomed to his withdrawn nature. He laughed at jests, engaged in conversation, and even danced with several noble ladies at the insistence of his advisors. But throughout it all, his thoughts remained on Helena, working tirelessly in the kitchens below. When the feast finally ended, and the guests began to retire, Fenlor made his way to the kitchens. He found Helena overseeing the final cleanup, her red dress dusted with flour and her white hair escaping from its braid. She looked exhausted but satisfied, exchanging friendly words with the other cooks as they worked. She looked up as he entered, surprise crossing her features. "Your Majesty," she said, automatically falling into formality in front of the other servants. "Is something amiss?" "Walk with me," Fenlor said. "Please." They left the bustling kitchen and walked through the quiet corridors of the castle. Fenlor led her to a small garden courtyard, enclosed by high walls and open to the night sky. Stars glittered overhead, and the cold air carried the scent of pine and winter earth. "Helena," Fenlor began, then stopped, his throat tight, his carefully prepared words suddenly inadequate for the depth of what he needed to say. He had faced armies without fear, made decisions that affected thousands of lives, negotiated treaties and judged criminals and led warriors into battle. But in this moment, standing before this white-haired woman who had saved his life without even knowing it, he felt utterly vulnerable, completely exposed. Helena waited patiently, her gray eyes reflecting starlight, her expression open and kind. She did not rush him, did not press for explanation, simply stood in that comfortable silence they had shared so many times before. "These past months with you," Fenlor started again, the words coming slowly but gaining momentum as he spoke. "They have changed me in ways I never expected, in ways I did not think were possible anymore. You changed me, Helena. You gave me back my life when I had given up on it completely, when I was ready to let myself waste away into nothing. You reminded me what it means to feel joy, to look forward to each day, to find purpose in simple moments. You made me believe I could be whole again, not the same as I was before, but whole in a new way, shaped by loss but not destroyed by it. She smiled gently, warmly, the expression lighting up her delicate features. I am glad. Truly. You deserve happiness, Fenler. You deserve to live fully, to embrace life instead of hiding from it. But it is more than that, he pressed on, his voice gaining strength, urgency. What I feel for you has grown beyond gratitude or friendship. It has become something deeper, something I tried to deny but cannot any longer. Helena, I have fallen in love with you, completely and irrevocably, with every part of me that I thought had died with Annalith. He took a breath, forcing himself to meet her eyes directly, to let her see the full truth of his feelings. I know it may seem sudden or inappropriate given our circumstances, given the difference in our stations, given everything. But I cannot keep this hidden any longer. It feels like a dishonesty, a betrayal of the honesty we have always shared. He stepped closer, close enough to see the way the cold air had brought color to her cheeks, close enough to catch the faint scent of herbs that always clung to her from hours in the kitchen. I want you by my side, not as my cook, not as my friend, but as my queen. I want to build a future with you, to share this kingdom and this life with someone who sees me as more than just a title or position. Someone who has seen me at my lowest and helped me rise. Someone who makes me want to be better, to do better, to live better. He paused, his heart racing, aware that every word he spoke was taking him further from the safety of restraint and closer to the possibility of devastating rejection. I know I am asking a great deal. The life of a queen is not easy, filled with responsibility and scrutiny and demands that never cease. But I would face all of it gladly if you were beside me. I would give you everything I have, everything I am. I would spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you have already given me by simply being who you are. Helena's expression had shifted during his confession, surprise giving way to something more complicated, a mixture of tenderness and sorrow that made Fenler's heart sink. Fenler, she said softly, you honor me more than you know with these words. Any woman would be fortunate to receive such devotion from someone like you. But, Fenler prompted, hearing the unspoken word. But my heart belongs to another, Helena said, her voice gentle but firm. Emmanuel has been my companion through the darkest times of my life. He loved me when I was nothing, when I had nothing to offer. Our bond is simple and honest, built over years of shared struggle and mutual support. She met his gaze directly. I care for you deeply, Fenlor. I admire your strength, your vulnerability, your capacity for growth. But the love I have for you is that of a dear friend, not a romantic partner. The words landed like physical blows, each one precise and devastating. Fenlor felt his carefully built hope crumbling, leaving behind a familiar ache of loss. But even in his pain, he recognized the courage it took for Helena to speak such truth, to risk his displeasure and her position by refusing the king. Does he know? Fenler asked quietly. Emmanuel, does he know how fortunate he is? I hope so, Helena said with a small smile. He is a good man, Fenler, patient and kind and honest. He has waited for me without complaint, trusting that I would return to him when I was ready. And are you? Fenler asked. Ready? Helena nodded slowly. Working here, seeing you heal, it has shown me that I have my own healing to finish. I have been hiding in service to you, using your needs as an excuse to avoid my own life. But I cannot stay forever. Eventually, I must step forward into my own future. Fenler felt his throat tighten. When will you leave? Not immediately, Helena assured him. The kingdom needs you stable, and I would not abandon you before ensuring you can continue without me. But perhaps in the spring, when the weather turns and new beginnings feel possible. Spring, Fenler repeated numbly. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of unfulfilled longing hanging between them. Finally, Helena stepped closer and took his hand, her fingers small and warm against his palm. Thank you, she said, for trusting me with your heart. I know what it cost you to love again after losing Annalith. Please do not let this refusal make you close yourself off once more. You have so much love to give, Fenler. The right person will cherish it completely. Fenler looked down at their joined hands, memorizing the feeling. How do I let you go? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. The same way you let go of Annalith, Helena said gently. Not by forgetting, but by accepting that some people come into our lives to teach us, to heal us, to prepare us for what comes next. I needed you to give me a place of safety and stability, and perhaps you needed me to show you that you could live and love again, even if not with me. It is a painful gift, Fenler said. The most meaningful ones often are. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of respect and farewell rather than romance. Then I will accept it with grace, even if it breaks my heart. Winter passed slowly. Fenler threw himself into governance with renewed vigor, using work to distract from the ache of rejection. He consulted with advisors, visited villages affected by the previous year's poor harvest, and implemented reforms suggested by his council. The kingdom flourished under his restored attention, and people began to speak of a renaissance, a return to the prosperity and justice that had defined his early reign. Helena continued her work in the castle, but there was a subtle shift in their dynamic. Where before they had shared easy companionship, now there was a careful gentleness, an awareness of boundaries that had been drawn. They still took occasional meals together, but the conversations were lighter, focused on neutral topics rather than the deep sharing of earlier months. Fenler caught glimpses of Helena in the castle gardens, tending to her herbs and vegetables, and sometimes he would see a wistful expression on her face, as if she too was mourning what might have been in different circumstances. As the last snows melted and the first green shoots appeared in the gardens, Helena came to Fenler's chambers one evening. She wore her red dress, cleaned and mended, her white hair braided simply. Spring has come, she said quietly. It is time for me to go. Fenler had known this moment was approaching, but the reality of it still struck him hard. He nodded slowly. You have somewhere to go? Emmanuel has been saving money, Helena said. We plan to open a small tavern together, a place where people can come for good food and warm company. It is a modest dream, but it is ours. It is a worthy dream, Fenler said sincerely. Where will this tavern be? In the lower quarter of the capital, where I used to sell my food. We want to serve the people who cannot afford fancy establishments, the ones who need comfort most. Fenler moved to his desk and withdrew a small leather pouch, heavy with coin. Then let this be my investment in your dream, he said, offering it to Helena. Consider it a thank you for everything you have done for me and for the kingdom. Helena hesitated, then accepted the pouch with a deep bow. You honor us, Your Majesty. Fenler, he corrected gently. Please, one last time, call me Fenler. She looked up, tears glistening in her gray eyes. Fenler, she said, thank you. For trusting me, for letting me help you, for being brave enough to love again, even knowing the risk. Thank you, he replied, for saving my life, for seeing the man beneath the crown, for being exactly who you are. Helena stepped forward and embraced him briefly, a gesture of friendship and farewell. When she pulled back, she was smiling despite her tears. Live well, Fenler. Rule well. And when the time comes, love well again. I will try, he promised. She left that night, departing quietly with only a small pack of belongings and the pouch of coins Fenler had given her. He watched from his window as she passed through the castle gates, her white hair gleaming in the moonlight, walking toward a future he could not share. The castle felt emptier without her presence. Meals returned to formal affairs prepared by other cooks, none of whom could quite replicate the warmth Helena had brought to even the simplest dish. But Fenler did not sink back into darkness. He had learned too much, grown too much to regress entirely. Instead, he poured his energy into being the king his people needed. He established new trade agreements, funded improvements to infrastructure, and personally visited regions of the kingdom he had neglected during his years of grief. People began to speak of their king with renewed hope and loyalty, seeing in him a leader who had weathered terrible storms and emerged stronger. Months passed. Summer came, warm and abundant. Fenler received reports from his agents in the city that a new tavern had opened in the lower quarter, quickly becoming popular for its excellent food and welcoming atmosphere. He heard that the proprietors, a white-haired woman and her carpenter husband, were beloved by their community for their generosity and kindness. The news brought a bittersweet smile to his face. Helena had found her happiness, built the life she had dreamed of. It was everything he had hoped for her, even if it meant she would never be his. One autumn afternoon, Fenler was reviewing documents in his study when his chamberlain announced an unexpected visitor. A delegation from the lower quarter, seeking audience with the king. Curious, Fenler agreed to see them. To his surprise, the delegation was led by Helena and Emmanuel. Helena wore a simple but well-made dress of deep green, and her hand was clasped in that of a man with kind eyes and calloused hands, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples. "Your Majesty," Helena said, bowing deeply, "we come to thank you for your generosity and to invite you to visit our humble establishment, if you would honor us." Fenler studied Emmanuel, seeing immediately why Helena loved him. There was honesty in his face, strength tempered with gentleness, and the way he looked at Helena spoke of quiet devotion that needed no grand gestures. "I would be honored," Fenler said, "though I wonder what prompted this formal invitation." Emmanuel spoke for the first time, his voice deep and steady. "Helena told me what you did for her, Your Majesty. How you gave her work when she needed it. How you trusted her despite her humble origins. How you let her go when she needed to leave." He met Fenler's gaze directly, one man to another. That kind of respect and kindness deserves acknowledgement. "We wanted you to know that your investment in our dream has borne fruit, and we wish to share that fruit with you." Fenler felt a warmth bloom in his chest, different from romantic love but no less meaningful. "Very well," he said. "I would be delighted to visit your tavern." 3 days later, Fenler arrived at the establishment that Helena and Emmanuel had named the Kindred Hearth. It was a modest building, but well-maintained, with warm light spilling from its windows and the scent of cooking food drifting into the street. Inside, the space was filled with simple wooden tables and benches, decorated with dried herbs and flowers. Working-class families and laborers filled most of the seats, sharing meals and conversation. Helena greeted him warmly but without excessive formality, showing him to a small private table near the back. Emmanuel brought out dish after dish, each one prepared with care and skill. The food was simple but excellent, reminiscent of the meals Helena had made in the castle, but with subtle variations that showed her continued growth as a cook. As Fenler ate, he watched Helena and Emmanuel work together with practiced ease. The love between them was evident in small gestures. The way Emmanuel steadied Helena when she carried a heavy tray. The way Helena smiled at him when their paths crossed. The unspoken communication that came from deep familiarity and trust. There was no jealousy in Fenler's observation, only acceptance. This was where Helena belonged, in this warm space she had created, serving people who needed comfort and community. She was not meant for the rigid formality of court life, the political maneuvering and constant scrutiny. She was meant for this: simple kindness, honest work, and genuine connection. Before he left, Helena walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means more than you know." "Thank you for the invitation," Fenler replied. "You have built something beautiful here, Helena, something that will touch more lives than you may ever realize." She smiled. "I learned from the best. You showed me that sometimes the greatest power lies not in commanding, but in serving those who need us most." Fenlor placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of blessing and farewell. "Be happy, Helena Nightwill. You have earned it." "I am," she said simply. "And I hope in time you will find your own happiness as well." As Fenlor walked back through the city streets toward the castle, he realized she was right. He was not yet happy in the way she was, content and settled. But he was no longer drowning in grief either. He had learned to live with loss, to honor the dead without being consumed by their absence. Helena had given him that gift. She had entered his life at his darkest moment, and through simple kindness and honest companionship, had shown him the path back to wholeness. She had not been his destiny, but she had been his salvation. Years passed. Fenlor continued to rule with wisdom and strength, his reputation growing as a just and compassionate king. He never remarried, though he entertained the possibility when his advisors pressed him. Perhaps, he told them, the right person would come in time. Or perhaps his purpose was simply to serve his kingdom without distraction. He visited the kindred hearth occasionally, always welcomed warmly, but treated with the same casual friendliness as any other patron. He watched as Helena and Emmanuel's family grew, first with one child, then another, their tavern expanding to include rooms for travelers and a small garden where Helena grew her herbs. On the anniversary of Annalith's death, Fenlor returned to the mausoleum as he did every year, but now he brought flowers and spent time speaking to her memory, not with guilt, but with love and gratitude. He told her about the kingdom, about the people they had both worked to protect, and about the lessons he had learned from loss. And he told her about Helena, about the white-haired cook who had saved his life with a simple bowl of stew, who had loved him enough to refuse him, who had shown him that letting go could be its own form of love. The sun set over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Fenlor stood at his window, looking out over the city lights, just beginning to flicker to life. Somewhere down there, in a warm tavern filled with laughter and the scent of good food, Helena was living the life she had chosen. And here, in the castle built of stone and duty and hard-won wisdom, Fenlor was living his. They were different lives, traveling different paths, but they had intersected at exactly the right moment, each one giving the other what they most needed. Helena had needed safety and opportunity. Fenlor had needed compassion and hope. It had not been the love story he had imagined. There had been no grand romance, no dramatic declarations, no happily ever after in the traditional sense. But it had been a love story nonetheless, one written in acts of service and sacrifice, in the courage to speak truth even when it hurt, in the wisdom to let go of what was not meant to be held. Fenlor Ashcrest, the broken alpha king who had once refused to eat anyone's food, had been fed not just with sustenance but with the possibility of healing. And though Helena Nightwill had chosen another path, she had left him with the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that life could begin again, even after the deepest loss. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Fenlor touched the windowsill, feeling the cool stone beneath his fingers, grounding himself in this moment, this life, this kingdom that still needed him. He was no longer broken. He was scarred, yes, marked by loss and grief and unfulfilled longing, but he was whole in a way that mattered more. Whole enough to lead, to serve, to face each new day with purpose. Helena had taught him that some people enter our lives not to stay, but to show us the way forward. She had been his guide through darkness, his proof that joy could exist even after devastation. And as Fenler turned from the window and returned to his duties, he carried that lesson with him like a light against the coming night. The kingdom slept peacefully beneath his watch. Somewhere in the city, Helena smiled at her husband as they cleaned up after another successful evening at their tavern. The world turned, time moved forward, and in their separate spheres, both the king and the cook lived lives that honored the brief, shining moment when their paths had crossed. It was not the ending either of them had expected, but it was, in its own way, exactly the ending both of them needed. And that, Fenler had learned, was its own kind of perfect. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.